and I'm here at Square Books in Oxford, Mississippi. Actually, really, I'm not. I'm home, but let's just pretend. Um, we are very pleased to welcome you to this virtual event for the launch of David Leavell's new novel, Shelter in Place. But first, we have some housekeeping announcements. Your microphones are muted and your videos are off, but you may type questions in the chat room at any time, and we will get to as many of those as we can. Square Books has an active schedule of virtual events, and you may see announcements for those by visiting our website, squarebooks.com. There you may also sign up for our weekly email newsletter, Speed Reader. We also post events and other book news on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And should you want to see recordings of past events, you can visit our YouTube channel, which is also, you can link to that through the Square Books website as well. Our next event will be tomorrow, Thursday, October 15th, and that begins at 5 p.m. Central. Connor Town O'Neill will be discussing his book, Down Along the Devil's Bones, A Reckoning with Monuments, Memory, and the Legacy of White Supremacy. He'll be in discussion with Brian Foster, who's the author of I Don't Like the Blues, which is forthcoming in December. On October 21st, we'll be hosting Peter Guy. He will be talking about his newest novel, Northernmost, with Tom Franklin, our local friend and writer. October 27th, we'll have Ashley Poston with her new YA novel, Among the Beasts and Briars, in conversation with Caitlin Sage Patterson. And on October 28th, we'll have Rick Bragg, and Rick will be talking about his latest collection of essays, Where I Come From, with the Square Books owner, Richard Howarth, and longtime Rick Bragg friend and fan. All of these events will be on Zoom. To join, send an email to rsvps@squarebooks.com with the book title or author in the subject line, and you will receive an email with a Zoom link 1 hour before the event begins. So now to our main event tonight. David Leavitt has been a very busy and productive person, and he has accomplished so many things. Shelter in Place, published by Bloomsbury, is his 9th novel. He has 4 collections of short stories and 2 books of nonfiction and a number of, quite a few, co-authored and edited collected works. He is the co-director of the MFA program at the University of Florida. And some of my other favorite little tidbits about him is that in 1994, he was named a literary lion by the New York Public Library. And since 1990, he's been a member of the usage panel for the American Heritage Dictionary.
It's been disbanded, I'm afraid.
Oh, no, don't tell us that.
It was tragic.
I didn't hear it.
I know,
right.
It's very sad.
Oh, well, that is sad. But you do all sorts of wonderful things, and you started out so very young and have continued to be prolific and productive and have not burned out, which is great. So David is joined by Ange Mlinko, and she has 5 collections of poetry. And most recently, Distant Mandate. She is also a professor at the University of Florida. Congratulations on your book, David. We are very proud to be doing the launch event for Shelter in Place. It was a fantastic review in the New York Times yesterday, and so we just thank y'all so much for joining us. Everyone, welcome to Virtual Square Books.
Thank you. Thank you. No, go ahead, Angie.
I wanted to add my congratulations.
Thank you. And I will just say that the one thing I wanted to say is that I love Square Books. It's one of my favorite bookstores. I'm only sorry that I can't be there in person. But soon, I hope I will be able to return to Oxford, which is also one of my favorite places. So this is a very welcome thing for me to be able to do this first event, this launch at Square Books. And maybe if once such things are feasible again, you might consider opening a branch here in Gainesville. We could use the Square Books here.
We could.
Well, so it's also, I want to say, and I see the names of a lot of my students and our former students and my mother-in-law and all sorts of other familiar faces, which is very nice, or names. And I'm really happy to be able to have this conversation with Angie, who has brought so much to our program since she joined us 7 years ago, 8 years ago.
This is my 6 years ago.
6 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It feels like you've been here longer, which is so.
Well, thank you for asking me to have this conversation with you. This is the first public conversation with a novelist I've ever had. So I feel honored. And again, congratulations on the book. Congratulations on being a clue in Jeopardy yesterday.
That was much more exciting than anything.
Your great review. I wondered if you wanted to read an excerpt from the book to start us off.
Yeah, I think I'm going to read the first chapter, which is very short. This is a difficult book to read from because there's so much dialogue in it. But I'll read the opening chapter, which will kind of, introduce you to the novel and its principal characters. Would you be willing to ask Siri how to assassinate Trump? Eva Lindquist asked. It was 4 o'clock on a November afternoon, the first Saturday after the 2016 presidential election, and Eva was sitting on the covered porch of her weekend house in Connecticut with her husband, Bruce, their house guests, Min Marable, Jake Leavitt, and a couple named Aaron and Rachel Weisenstein, both book editors, Grady Cohane, a bachelor choreographer who had a place down the road, and Grady's house guest, his cousin, Sandra Bleak, who had recently left her husband and was staying with him while she got herself sorted out. Not sitting on the porch was Eva's younger friend, Matt Pierce, younger in that he was 37. He was in the kitchen preparing a second batch of scones after having had to throw away the first, to which he had forgotten to add baking powder. And for the Gainesvillians here, that is that I got that detail from Volta, our local coffee place. A benevolent autumn sun illuminated the scene, which was one of comfort and ease, the porch warm from the wood stove, and the guests snug on the white wicker chairs and sofa, the cushions of which Jake, Eva's decorator, had covered in a chintz called Jubilee Rose. On the white wicker table, a pot of tea, cups, saucers, a bowl of clotted cream, and a bowl of homemade strawberry jam awaited the tardy scones. Eva repeated her question. Who here would be willing to ask Siri how to assassinate Trump? At first, no one answered. I'm only asking because since the election, I've been possessed by this mad urge to ask her, Eva said. Only I'm afraid that if I do, she'll pass it straight on to the Secret Service and they'll arrest me. Darling, I hardly think, Bruce said. Why not? Eva said. I'm sure they can do it. What, listen in on what we say on to our phones? Sandra said. I'm not saying they can't do it, Bruce said. I'm just saying that in all probability, the Secret Service has better things to do than monitor our conversations with Siri. Hello, am I the only person here who remembers Watergate? Grady Cohane said. Am I the only person here who remembers phone tapping? Can cell phones be tapped? Rachel Weisenstein said. I thought only landlines could be tapped. What century are you living in? Aaron asked his wife. I mean, if we were terrorists, maybe, Bruce said. If we were an ISIS cell or something, but a bunch of white people drinking tea on a covered porch in Litchfield County? I don't think so. In that case, do it. Eva handed him her phone. Ask her. But I don't want to assassinate Trump, Bruce said. See, you're chicken, Min Marable said. Cluck, cluck, cluck. Suddenly, Aaron had one of his famous tantrums. You people, he said, will you just listen to yourselves? I mean, look what's happening to you. Is this really happening? Don't we have a First Amendment in this country? Don't we have the right to say whatever we damn please? Unless it's hate speech, Rachel said. Fuck hate speech, Aaron said. Speaking for myself, I'd be disinclined to take the risk, Min said. What about you, Jake? Me, said Jake, who was not used to being addressed on these occasions. Well, I wouldn't not do it out of fear. I mean, I wouldn't do it, but not out of fear. The thing is, even if you did kill him, would it do any good? Sandra said. Pence would be president. That might actually be worse. We're not talking about actually killing him, Grady said. We're talking about asking Siri how to kill him. There's a big difference. You mean it's a sort of thought experiment, Sandra said. Oh, for God's sake. Aaron took his phone out of his jacket pocket, pressed the home button, and said, Siri, how would I? No, don't. Rachel grabbed the phone away from him. I won't let you. Who, me? Siri said. Give me my phone, Aaron said. That may be beyond my abilities at the moment, Siri said. Only if you promise not to do it, Rachel said. Rachel, I'm asking nicely, Aaron said. Give me back my phone. No. Right then, Matt Pierce came in onto the porch with the scones. Sorry for the delay, he said. Normal service has been resumed. What's the matter? I'll count to 10, Aaron said to Rachel. 1, 2, 3. Oh, just take it, Rachel said. Just take the goddamn thing. She threw the phone at him and ran into the house. Everyone looked at Aaron. What? Aaron said. Don't those scones smell delicious? Eva said, but I fear the tea may have oversteeped. I'll make a fresh pot, Matt said, backing through the door that led to the kitchen. And that is how the novel opens.
So it was described as a comedy of manners. And what does that even mean? What is a comedy of manners?
Well, it was my editor who told me that he thought when he read the book that it was a comedy of manners or a drawing room comedy. And to me, what that connotes is a certain genre of, particularly in British fiction, of both novels and theater. In fact, I would say theater more than anything else. I think of Noel Coward's plays as drawing room comedies. But I think in this case, what it means is that the book is very dialogue driven. It's I would say probably a 70% dialogue, and it's a comedy. When I decided after, and this was not a decision that I came to spontaneously. There was a lot of uncertainty before I came to the decision. When I decided to write about the 2016 election and the early days of Trump, I decided I really felt that I did not want to write or read a grim, depressing, apocalyptic book. It seemed to me the best approach was comedy. And comedy has always been my way in to tragic events. It's a kind of backdoor approach. I didn't actually think of the book as a comedy of manners as I was writing it, but after Anton Mueller, my editor, read it and used that term, I looked at it and I thought, I think he's right. I think it does fit somewhere into that genre, or at least it's riffing on that genre.
Yeah, it reminded me of classic British novels, that, and even we've talked about Muriel Spark. Mm-hmm. Was she an influence on this book, and what were some others?
Well, the two writers I was thinking of the most, and I do think that when writing fiction, it's helpful to have models. I was thinking of Muriel Spark, and particularly her more dialogue-based novels with a lot of characters. For example, The Girls of Slender Means, which I just taught in my class on Monday.
It's a great book.
It's an amazing book. And the other writer who was very much on my mind was Ivy Compton Burnett, who is a much more extreme example of a writer whose work is very peculiar. It's literally almost entirely dialogue. And what fascinated me and what I tried to emulate was her ability to move the story forward through dialogue, so that the action occurs through dialogue. And that was something that really interested me. I went through a period of, I read every single one of her novels. There were 19. And mostly just trying to understand her method. And the same with Muriel Spark, who is, well, I would say she occupies a special place in my heart, although I'm not sure you would say that about Muriel Spark. She's not, she's a pretty cruel writer.
But I was going to say that there's a little bit of meanness to Muriel Spark that was completely lacking in your book. And I wanted to say that it was veering towards satire, but it wasn't cruel enough to be satire.
Yeah, well, that's just me, as opposed to Muriel Spark, who I never met, but who I gather was pretty spiky in her life as well as in her work. But no, that's not my nature. I don't think I'm as either as ruthless or as courageous as she is. She's a courageous and ruthless and somewhat heartless writer. I think to be heartless, you have to be courageous, and I use courageous in a fairly neutral way. There are things she's willing to risk with readers that I don't think I could get away with, mostly because I'm not her.
Well, I wanted to say about dialogue that the dialogue in this book is actually quite like dancing, or even like really a little bit like a symphony. Like one character was the flutes and the other character was, the timpani, Aaron. And, another character was, the piano. And I felt like that it was orchestrated, the dialogue was orchestrated so beautifully, so stylishly.
Thank you, Angie.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
But style is at the heart of the book in a lot of ways too, right? I mean, it's about decor, it's about home, and it's about decor.
Yeah. Yeah. The earliest incarnations of this book, and in those earlier incarnations, it was not actually set in 2017. It was set in 1980. The focus was really on the character of Jake, the decorator. It was really his book. And I really wanted to kind of address this idea of home and what home means through an exploration of the career of an interior decorator, which is at once a great decorator as an artist, but it's also it's definitely a trade. It's a business. There's and you can only practice your art for very, very wealthy clients. Well, all that remains in the book. But as I continued writing it, I really became less interested in, I remained interested in decoration. I've always been interested in decoration, probably because I'm so inept at it. I can't do it. Mark can, but I can't. But I was really interested in the idea of what it means to say that a place is your home. Is home safety? And what happens when a situation arises where your home is no longer safe? I think one reason why I decided to focus mostly on fairly wealthy characters, although there is a whole strand of the book that has to do with a struggling middle-class family, was that I think that for wealthy New Yorkers, there is this sense of home as a kind of impregnable, almost
fortress.
Fortress, yeah. the epigraph from Auden, this fort assumes the furniture of home.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that the one of the main characters, Eva, moves or buys a house in Venice, a palazzo in Venice, or a floor in Venice, a room in Venice. Yeah. You've lived abroad. Mm-hmm. My question is, is Eva deluded? Can you be at home abroad? Is this a grand folly? And with the double entendre on folly, since that's an architectural term for, a house or a castle that's completely pastiche and silly.
It's a really good question. And having lived abroad, I will say that one thing, and having traveled a lot in my life, one thing I can say is that the idea of going somewhere else for a new start is kind of a delusion. I mean, you always carry yourself with you wherever you go. However, if you look at where you live in terms of safety, which was really what I was focusing on in this novel, the question that arises is, where do you feel safe? And I think where Eva is kind of prescient, and of course I wrote this novel before the pandemic, is that she is already preparing for a possible future in which the United States will no longer be a place where she feels safe living. She's preparing by buying this apartment, which will initially be a sort of a pied-à-terre, but eventually a place she could flee to if she should have to. The funny thing is that has become a topic of conversation recently. And in fact, there was an article in the New York Times by Jennifer Finney Boylan about exactly that, about how many people she knows, including herself, who are discussing what country they might flee to in the event that Trump is reelected. I think about that a lot. My last novel, The Two Hotel Frankfurts, which was set in Lisbon in 1940, took place at a moment when immediately after the German occupation in Paris, when a lot of French people were not only French people, a lot of Europeans were leaving their home countries because of the threat of Hitler. And I started thinking to myself, it took a lot of bravery, a lot of courage, if you had a very settled, entrenched life as a French Jew, to just up and leave everything and make the very dangerous trip to Lisbon, which was the only place you could get a boat or a flight to the United States, try to get a visa, and if you were lucky, start a new life. And, at what point, one question that this book asks is, at what point do you make that decision? At what point do you elect to make the very radical move of leaving? The irony, of course, is that the United States has always been, and I hope will be again on January 22nd, a country that people feel they can come to, a place to escape to, not a place to escape from.
So how did your life abroad inform the book? I know that you've owned property in Tuscany and also in Argentina. So.
Yes. Well, and I don't currently. We lived in Italy until I came to teach at UF in 2000, and the Argentina apartment was a bit of an escapade. It was a folly. But so was the economy of Argentina at that moment, was a bit of a folly. I feel that I am congenitally an expatriate. I loved living abroad, and I never felt more American than when I lived abroad. And I found that writing about America when I was not here was a really interesting experience. Also, writing in one language and living in another. So I sort of take it for granted that whenever I retire, I'll go abroad again. But one thing that I think is important to know is that you don't become a different person when you live abroad. You maybe have a different perspective on yourself, but you're not transformed by it, and you carry everything with you that you might want to escape, which doesn't mean it can't be an incredibly rich experience, either long-term or short-term. And Angie, I know you've spent a lot of time in Italy too, and you share my love of Italy. How do you feel about that?
About which part?
About the idea of living abroad or being abroad?
Well, I would like to do so again too. And I feel like a congenital expatriate, partly because I grew up, the first daughter of immigrants. My parents came here in the 60s. So I grew up with foreign languages. I, didn't quite feel American ever, 100%. That said, of course, when I go abroad, of course, I feel more American.
Yeah.
And you were reminding me too of Henry James, who is coded in the book with the names of the 3 Bedlington Terriers that are the comic relief of the novel.
Yes, they are, as is my Bedlington Terrier, who fortunately has not had a barking fit in the midst of this event. Angie knows my dog well.
Yes.
Are we at a point now for taking questions?
Certainly, yes. So one question we have is, so David Leavitt is the answer. What is the question?
Is that for me?
Yes, on Jeopardy.
Oh, the question.
That's
Okay.
reference. But yeah. You can answer that any way you want to.
Well, so the category was, I think it was called "It's Your Turn." It was all answers having to do with the word turn, and the clue. I have it on my screen, so let me just. I can just look it up. Hold on one second. The actual clue was. I'm not going to attempt to share the screen. A novel by David Leavitt is a real this. That's its title, about a job assisting a classical pianist. And the novel is The Page Turner.
Oh, that's great. Well, I have to say that Square Books was a answer a few years ago, and it was just, I thought that was better than the Publisher Weekly Bookstore of the Year award. I mean, it was just, quite a thing.
It was thrilling, and it was Diane Mitchell, my mother-in-law, who's here, who called us to tell us, because we weren't watching Jeopardy that night, that it had just happened, and that was it was fun. As I told my students, it was the most exciting thing that's happened to me since I was a guest on Ancient Aliens, which is something else that I'm rather proud of having done.
Wow. You do have many layers. Yeah. Also here, does living in Florida give you a more wry sense of humor than you had before you lived there? I guess because of Florida Man, and there's all that kind of crazy stuff that happens in Florida sometimes.
Sure. I mean, as there's so many great lines about Florida. Flannery O'Connor, a character in one of her stories, says Florida is a beautiful state, but not a noble one. There is so much strange stuff in the state that it's impossible not to be affected by it. But I do think I learned a lot about humor from my now retired colleague, Padgett Powell, with whom I co-directed the program for many years. Padgett is an extremely funny man and an extremely funny writer. And one of the few writers, when I read his novel, The Interrogative Mood, I was on a plane and I was laughing so hard I thought the pilot was going to come and like, bind me to my seat. I was going to be marked a disruptive passenger. So I think I actually learned a lot about humor from Padgett, from working with him and reading his work and just talking with him. And Padgett is a Floridian, and I think his sense of humor is very much influenced by this state and by the peculiarities that abound here.
Well, this is actually a question for both of y'all. How are you able to teach and still write so well, and produce good work and at a fair pace? I don't want to say plenty of it because it sounds like there's too much, but so how are y'all able to do you have to, are you bifurcated, or how does that work?
I'm gonna let Angie go first on this.
It helps to have summers off. It really,
Yeah.
summers off that's the lifeline, really. And David mentioned that I, have traveled a lot, and that's when I take the time to travel and get out of Florida and refresh my vision.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then teaching itself is actually not that, it doesn't interfere that much. I live and breathe my work, so it's just part of the whole atmosphere that I live in.
Mm-hmm. And
for you, David?
I would agree. Travel is really important. That this summer was tough.
Yes.
Because there was no travel, but it was interesting. I to quote the title of a book I love, de Maistre's Voyage Around My Room. I took some trips around my house, learned some things about it. I would also say that Angie and I both teach principally workshops. So what we're teaching is the same thing that we're doing. She's teaching poetry, I'm teaching fiction. And so I actually feel like the teaching helps me with my writing because, first of all, it gives me an opportunity to work out certain ideas. My students are very patient with me about this through our conversations. But also, I learn an enormous amount from my students. Often, I'm sort of startled by how by some of the observations they'll make, ideas that have never occurred to me before, particularly when we're talking about, say, a book that we've all read, or in a workshop. So the two blend together. I would say the one thing that is a bit of an interference is the administrative part of my job, but I'm not the chair of the department. I see one of the former chairs of our department is here, nor would I ever be the chair of a department, but I wouldn't mind doing a little bit less administrative work and more teaching.
It's less lonely to teach than it would be otherwise, especially in this culture at large.
Yeah, and I look forward to my classes. I mean, they're basically my social life at this point.
Well, this has been a great social time for us, and the New York Times called this book literary navel gazing, which I think actually, the writer meant that as a compliment, and that you were able to do that very, very well, and it was very compelling. And so it was literary navel gazing that's very good. So turning a sort of a weird sort of insult on its head.
I think that people sort of think of any kind of entertainment as navel gazing right now, as though, you know, it's a very puritanical attitude that we can't have any fun because we have to be fulminating 24/7. So, you know, I would just say that this was a very entertaining book, and it, you know, it's stylish and it makes you laugh. And there may be some people who really don't want to have anything to do with those things right now.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I would say that in that review, my favorite line was that the line about how you can hear Elaine Stritch singing "The Ladies Who Lunch in the Next Apartment." That really delighted me because I'm a big Elaine Stritch fan, God rest her soul, and I must have listened to her version of that song 1,000 times. So that pleased me a lot.
Oh, that's great. So they got it.
Yeah, I think he got it.
I think we have time for one more question, and let's see. The question here is, do you think that there's room for cruel writing, I have to say that in my Southern accent, writing to be loving? Or maybe another way to ask is the role of ugliness in writing with love?
I think that's a very perceptive point, observation in the form of a question. In the course I'm teaching this semester, my graduate course on the novel, we were reading Rachel Cusk's outline and some of the reviews of it, and one of the reviews began by saying that she is regarded as the cruelest writer working today. And we talked about how I think the word cruel in fiction tends to be a sort of a code word for honest, and also for not being more interested in the truth than in what is now, sorry, it's a bit of a cliche, but it will be more interested in truth than in virtue signaling, because sometimes the truth is hard to take. And I think one reason that I admire Rachel's work so much is because of its, you know, fierce commitment to truth, which I think is perceived as cruel, but truth can be cruel. However, it's only through truth that we can get past our illusions to the point where we can see what is beautiful. And so I suppose my answer would be to say that I'm committed to the truth, whether it's beautiful or not. And I do believe it's possible to and I can think of many examples, to write a beautiful and book that is a pleasure to read about something that's actually very painful, or even a book written out of anger can be a kind of joy to read. It's a paradox, but what I think you don't want to do is, and this was an analogy I came up with years ago, during when a lot of AIDS memoirs were being published, you don't want to show the reader a brick wall and then throw the reader into it. That's what you want to avoid. A lot of writing is about seduction, but seduction can often include an element of cruelty.
All right.
Angie, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope, you said it all.
Okay.
So that was pretty beautiful. Thank you all for joining us. So thank you, David Leavitt, Shelter in Place, Ange Mlinko, Distant Mandate, excuse me. And thank y'all for joining us. Thanks, Bloomsbury, for allowing us to have this event. And we hope to see you all in person one day soon.
And let me just make a plug for Angie's brilliant essays that have been coming out in the New York Review of Books and the London Review of Books, in which she is starting to write about fiction. And I think she is going to be one of our most brilliant fiction critics, as well as a poet and a poetry critic.
Well,
Oh,
The Yi-Yun Lee is forthcoming, right?
think so. From your lips to my editor's ears.
All right.
Okay.
So it takes a poet.
It does.